Why is it that when winter rolls around, it always seems to bring out the freaks, you know? I really hate it. When I was a senior in high school, I was a pizza delivery guy in a college town. For the most part, during winter break, business was really slow. During my second year delivering pizzas, though, I had the worst delivery experience ever. That night, I just so happened to be the only driver who was working. Well, on second thought, I guess maybe it wasn't quite that unusual. Most of the other drivers were college kids who would go home for breaks, so they wouldn't be around anyway. I was at work bored off my ass because there'd only been a few orders all day. Whilst I was hanging out and talking with the cashier, I actually became very grateful for this because a snowstorm was just starting to brew up. She was a very cute girl and I'd been trying to put the moves on her for a while. Each time I'd come up short though. I'd like to think I was making at least some progress when we got an order for a pizza finally. For many reasons, I was not happy about having to drive through pitch darkness in a snowstorm. It was really hard to see for one, and for two, I had to drive extremely slow. It was no surprise to me then that the pizza was to be delivered to a house far outside of town, mostly since there were no students on campus at this time. Even the trek to the house itself was slippery and dangerous. Luckily, I made it there just fine. It seemed to be an older two-story house, with nothing very unusual about it. I pulled my car into the slippery driveway. I was a bit apprehensive at first. There seemed to be no lights on at all. I double-checked my GPS. Definitely the right house, though. I gathered up the pizza and the cookie pizza for dessert and hopped out of my car. I walked up the steps to the front porch, nearly slipping along the way. Just as I hit the second step, the porch light shot on, startling me with the suddenness. When I made it to the screen door, the regular door opened. A lady who looked to be in her 50s or so opened the door. She immediately looked alarmed and opened the screen door as well. "What are you doing here? Get in the house right now!" I wasn't about to go into a stranger's house. I have your pizza," I stammered in confusion, suddenly even more unhappy about this assignment. "I didn't order a damn pizza. I can't fucking believe this is happening. Get in here right now or you're gonna get killed." "Why?" I asked, confused and now more than a little bit scared. The woman hurried me into the house and I went along with her. Once I was behind her and inside, she locked the door shut and bolted it several times. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. "Keep your voice down," the lady told me. "There's a guy outside who's been tormenting me and trying to get into my house. He cut my phone line and I haven't been able to call the police. He's been trying to get in and I've been terrified. He must have called for you to get me to open the door. He probably thought I couldn't just leave you out there to get killed." I thought the woman must be crazy, but then I started to hear noises. I looked over to the window by the porch, and what I saw made my blood run cold immediately. I could see a crazed-looking man on the porch right by the window, peeking in, tapping what looked to be the tip of a chef's knife against the glass. I had no idea how he could have gotten there so fast. Then I realized he must have been hiding somewhere at the same time I'd gotten there. "Holy shit!" I yelled, dropping the pizza and the cookie on the ground. As soon as I did, the man disappeared from view. I reached for my phone to call the police, but the old woman stopped me, telling me she had already tried and couldn't get a signal. She was trying to keep quiet in the house and didn't even want me trying to talk on the phone in case I alerted the man. "That's insane," I told her. "Don't you have a gun or something?" She told me she didn't keep one. I suggested we go into the kitchen together and grab some knives. She agreed this was a good idea. I followed the lady and we were there in a few seconds when I began to hear tapping on the window once more. I turned and looked over to the kitchen window, only to see the man there again, tapping his knife on the windowsill before disappearing out of view once more. I ran over to the knife block, and that's when I noticed something. The woman's chef knife was not in her knife block. I mentioned this to her, and the woman's entire demeanor instantly changed. "Well, that's because my husband has it. He'll be coming into the house now." The door in the kitchen then opened. I realized not only had it not been locked, It had been a setup from the very start. The crazed-looking man, who I realized must be this woman's husband, walked into the house. I reacted totally on instinct. I was still at the knife block, so I grabbed it. I didn't really have time to take out the other knives, so I simply picked the whole damn block up and threw it at both of them. I ran towards them and knocked the old man over while I made my way to the back door. I ran around the side of the house and momentarily slid on a patch of ice and fell down. I did manage to get back up quickly, but the moment I did, I saw the front porch light come on and the old man come shooting out. As I began to run, I saw the old woman coming at me from behind, so I took off. It was so slippery that I slipped again when I got to my car. I slammed my head against the window. Still though, I managed to open the car before either of them were able to get their hands on me. The crazy old man even tried to bust my car window by stabbing it with his knife. Luckily, my window was more than a match for his puny arms and did not shatter. I put the car in reverse and backed it out of the driveway. I would like to tell you that as I pulled out, I changed my mind and ran the car back into those two old shits. But I didn't. I just wanted to get the hell out of there and call the cops. When the cops investigated, it was much worse than I could have ever imagined. The couple who attacked me did not live in that house, as you might have guessed. In fact, they had broken in and even murdered the older woman who actually lived there. They were obviously going to try and kill me too. They hightailed it before the cops arrived. I have PTSD from the experience. I had to quit my job at the pizza place and just got myself a work-study job. I went off to college in a different state, and I don't come back home for the holidays now. When I was a sophomore in high school, I joined the basketball team. Although I did make the team, I very rarely got to play. I was not particularly tall, but I was a really good free throw shooter. I was pretty much only used when the game was close towards the end. If the other team was going to intentionally foul, I'd be given the ball. Well, this was high school basketball, so that rarely happened. In order to make sure I didn't get too rusty, I would stay behind at school to get in some regular practice. In fact, I practiced so hard that many times I ended up being one of the last people to leave the school building each day. On a Friday in early December, I was at school rather late practicing when I needed to refill my water. I walked out of the gym and down the hallway. Along the way though, I noticed that somebody seemed to be standing outside this set of double doors. When this person saw me, they began to start banging on the doors to get my attention. Obviously, I was not allowed to let anybody into the building after hours, but this guy just kept on banging, trying to get me to come over. I walked over quickly to let him know I would not be able to do anything or let him in. He told me he was a school janitor and that he'd forgotten his keys inside his office. He begged me to let him inside. I just shrugged him off and let him know that I couldn't do anything. Then I walked away. However, he just kept on banging away. After I filled my water bottle up, I walked back to the gym. The guy was still there, slamming on that door, trying to get my attention. I figured the best thing to do was just ignore him, so I didn't acknowledge him the second time. All this did was piss him off though. Actually, he called me a few expletives through the door. Yeah, 'cause that's the way to get me to help you out. Back in the gym, I went back to my monotonous routine to free throw. I would usually land about 9 out of 10 throws. I had gone through about 20 straight hits when I finally missed one. The ball bounced off the hoop and rolled over to those side double doors. As I walked over, I noticed it was now snowing pretty hardcore outside. I considered just calling it a day and walking home before the snow got too bad. I reached down to pick up that ball, only to stand up and be met eye to eye with this guy claiming to be a janitor. He didn't say a single thing to me, just stared me in the eye for what seemed like an eternity. All of a sudden, the corner of his mouth curved into a half smile. He grabbed the door handle and yanked on it. Of course, he didn't get in, but he railed at the door a bit, his eyes never leaving mine. He must have known that he had shaken me up pretty bad, because the half-smile gave way to a full, demented smile. Then he turned and walked away. I decided it might not be best to leave right now. Maybe I'd better just waste time in the gym and wait for that guy to get bored and leave or something. I wasn't worried about getting home in the snow because I didn't live very far away from the school, so I practiced for another hour and a half instead. Surely that would be enough time for the guy to leave. When I finally left, it was snowing pretty hard now. I even stood at the door for another 20 minutes to make sure the man was not still out there. Obviously, I'd pissed him off, but it's not like I'd done anything wrong. I mean, how crazy would you have to be to spend nearly 2 hours in a fierce snowstorm just to wait for me to get out? I left the school. It was dark and the snow was falling hard and fast. It didn't take long before my shoes were completely soaked over. I almost cursed myself for waiting so long to go home. Suddenly, though, I felt someone grab at me from behind, knocking me face first onto the ground. I fell hard and got snow in my eyes, and lost my backpack as well. When I was finally able to get my bearings once more, I saw the man from earlier, standing behind me holding my backpack in his hand. I was scared to death at first, thinking he was going to beat the crap out of me for not helping him earlier. Instead, he simply stood there in the snow watching me. He then held his hand out, as if to offer to help me up. I was cautious to accept it, but I was having a hard time getting up on my own. He yanked me back to my feet, then shoved my backpack back into my hands. All the while, he just kept staring into my eyes, that same half-smile on his face. I reached out and yanked my backpack away from him, or at least tried to pull it over to me. At first, he held on quite tightly to it. After a bit of back and forth, though, he released his grip, and I stumbled back slightly. I took my backpack and nervously thanked him for helping me. He didn't respond, though. His smile just grew even bigger. Nervously, I turned and began to walk home, although I kept watching him as I walked away, expecting him to bum rush me or something. He didn't do anything, though. He didn't even slowly follow me or anything like that. He just stood there, watching me as I walked home. I turned onto the streets and actually went around the block just to make sure he wouldn't know where I was going. By the time I'd actually gotten into my house, the man was nowhere to be found. My parents were home and I felt completely safe now. I got cleaned up and had a nice dinner with them. By the time my parents had gone to bed, I'd nearly forgotten all about the encounter. I decided to do a bit of homework before bedtime though, so I went to my room and over to my desk. I got my backpack, put it on my desk, and I opened it. I reached in to grab my textbooks, only to notice they were wet. Now I was pissed off at myself for getting snow in my bag. To my surprise though, when I withdrew my hand from my bag, it was not covered in snow. It was covered with blood. I dropped the bag to the floor. Freaked out, I grabbed it by the bottom and dumped all the contents onto the floor. Books, pencils, notebooks. All of a sudden, what seemed to be half the body of a Yorkshire Terrier fell out onto the floor. It looked like it was cut in half at the head, chest, and front paws, bloodying my bag. I screamed, waking my parents up and bringing them to the room. I didn't see that man again, so I assume he didn't want any further revenge. It didn't really matter though. What he had already done was bad enough. When I started working out a year ago to get into better shape, I had what I considered to be an ingenious idea. The gym was only about a mile away from my home, so in order to get the best workout I could, I would walk to the gym for a warm-up. My cool down would be the walk home. That way, I would get 2 miles of walking added onto my workout every day. It was pretty great actually, and I began to lose weight very swiftly. I have to admit that once it started getting cold and snowy outside, I started to feel like I should just drive instead. Still though, it had become such a part of my routine that I wasn't able to do so even when it got really cold. The one time I did try driving, I felt really guilty about it, so I didn't do it again. Instead, I just kept walking. The night my story takes place was one such night that I definitely should have driven. In fact, the weather itself should have been enough to indicate this to me. It was only in the upper 20s. It was snowing outside, but at least snowing lightly for now. When I headed out to the gym, the snow wasn't even sticking, so I grabbed my bag, put on my jacket, and headed out with confidence. I live in a small suburban town, and it was already quite dark out. There weren't many people out on the streets, and that was the way I really liked it. I felt like I had the whole town to myself almost as I walked along. The snow began to fall a bit harder as I continued, though. My visibility quickly became more limited. Still, though, this was not enough to get me to turn around and go home. The snow was not sticking. I thought I would be just fine. When I turned the corner past a liquor store, I jumped a bit when another man started coming down the corner. He was a little smaller than I was and was not dressed well for the weather. He was only wearing jeans and a jean jacket. We nearly collided, actually. "Oh, whoa, sorry, excuse me," I said to the man. He didn't acknowledge me at all, didn't even look up. He was wearing a black baseball cap and had it sitting low on his forehead. I couldn't get a good look at his face. The man just kinda shuffled along, didn't reply to me, didn't even look at me, least of all apologize to me, since he was equally to blame for the near collision. As the man walked by, I shook my head and muttered under my breath into the wind, "Asshole." Right out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man stop in place. I froze. I couldn't believe he'd heard me over the wind. I looked over to him, only to see he had turned around and was now staring daggers at me. The snow was falling harder now. His face was partially obscured by it. He just looked at me, didn't say a single word, made no attempt to communicate, to move towards me. After a few moments, I apologized once more and decided to make my way back to the gym. I kept on looking over my shoulder to see if the man was following me. He didn't, but I could see him standing there for a long time, tracking my movements as I walked away. I couldn't calm down at all until I'd arrived at the gym. It was a 24-hour facility, but had no active staff after 5 p.m. I had a key card instead that gave me access to the building. Getting there, I felt safe finally, because unless that guy was a gym member as well, there was no way he was getting inside. I was alone at the gym at this time, which I did prefer as well. The town I lived in was not huge, so coupled with the snow, it wasn't too surprising nobody was in the mood to work out. One side of the building was all windows. I kept on glancing out of them as I worked out. The snow was falling harder and harder, and now it began sticking. After I had lifted some weights, I got onto one of the treadmills, which was right in front of a window. I hopped on and began jogging. I was jogging for about 15 minutes when I noticed the snow was really piling up now. Hell, I could only see a few feet in front of the gym. The falling snow was having a bit of a hypnotic effect on me. I just kinda stared out into it as I jogged. Suddenly, the man in the jean jacket stepped out of that falling snow, right into my line of sight, and shocked me out of my trance. It caught me off guard. I tripped, falling onto the treadmill, which then knocked me onto the floor. I cursed myself for not wearing the shutoff key. At least I hadn't been hurt that bad, though. Looking up once more, I could see the man had now disappeared. I shook my head. Surely he just wanted to startle me, get his revenge, and be on his way. I finished the rest of my workout, which took about an hour or so. The whole time, the man never showed up again, so I figured I must have been right. I wasn't particularly worried. Over a foot of snow had accumulated since I'd arrived at the gym, and it was still falling steadily as well. I was dreading the walk home now, so I figured I should just go and get it over with. I flipped my bag over my shoulder and made my way out into the snow. It sucked big time, my feet working through the open foot of snow, snowflakes falling and stinging my eyes. I had to keep blinking constantly in order to even see where I was going, and I had to walk very slowly as well. I swore to myself I'd never do this again, and whenever it snowed in the future, I would just drive. I then turned the corner at the liquor store. I stopped when I saw the man again, this time standing in front of the doors facing right at me, like he had been waiting. I was so startled I slipped and fell on my ass in the snow. I looked at the man. He didn't move a muscle. This time, I noticed he was wearing a strange white mask. He had no features, just eye holes. It shook me. I hopped to my feet quickly. The man just kept on looking. A bit rattled, I figured he must be hanging around the liquor store for some reason. Grabbing my bag, I headed back on my way, all while watching him as closely as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't see beyond a few feet, so it wasn't long before I couldn't see him at all. That walk home was scary as hell. The snow was falling. I was scared of tripping. It was so cold the ground was freezing solid. I had to walk slowly to keep from sliding. The whole time, looking back behind me to see if the man was following me. That 1-mile walk seemed like a much longer journey than usual. With each slow step forward, I'd look behind me again. I turned, only this time to be met face to face with a white mask. This time, however, he didn't just stare at me. He grabbed me and shoved me down. It was easy. Although I was bigger than him, he had leverage, and he used it well. Before I had a chance to get up, he kicked me right in the crotch. While I was holding myself in pain, I looked at him. He pulled out one of those butterfly knives. I felt a jolt of terror, and despite the agony I was in, I tried to get up and run. He was so quick though. He was right on me. He pinned me to the ground. I tried to push him off, but I couldn't do it. At first, he took the butterfly knife and pushed it up against my cheek. The blade punctured my skin, and I felt blood running down my face. As I looked into the dark eyes behind that mask, I really thought I was going to die right there. Feeling a surge of fear, something caused me to strike out. I slammed the guy right in his balls just like he had done for me. He dropped the knife, and I was able to kick him off me. He recovered much quicker than I did. As I turned to get up and run, he grabbed the knife once more and sliced at me, slicing through my shoe and cutting my foot open. I fell down again and slammed my face on the concrete of the sidewalk. For once, I was thankful for that foot of snow. It cushioned the fall a bit. Still, I could feel tears falling down my cheeks. I was convinced I was about to die. I tried to get up again. Something finally went my way. I got some leverage with my foot. When the guy moved toward me, I kicked him in the face. He slipped on the ice and fell back on his ass. He dropped his knife into the snow, and I kicked some snow into his eyes. I have no idea what effect it had. I turned around and just booked it out of there as quickly as I could. I tripped a few times, but I moved much faster than I ever have before. The rest of the walk home was terrorizing. I had no idea if this psycho would just appear out of the snow once more. Thankfully, I made it home safely. I locked the door and called the cops. The police came and took a statement. They wanted me to come down to the station. Afterwards, I went to the hospital for my cuts. It wasn't until I arrived that I found out why they wanted me there. It turns out the liquor store had been held up earlier, and the cashier had been stabbed to death. They figured it happened while I was at the gym, and the guy must have thought I'd called them. They didn't catch the man. Not only did I stop walking to the gym, I found a new gym to go to as well. I grew up on the countryside, right next to a national park frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts. It was the kind of park where you're not really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run. 10-year-old me felt it was a stupid rule though, and did so anyway. The trails were perfect for it after all. I knew full well that I was not supposed to do this, and had been caught a few times. Nothing much had ever come of it though, besides a half-hearted "don't do it again." I did, of course, until one day something frightening happened that made me finally stop. My family were horse breeders, you see, and I would often take the horses for a ride, usually in this forbidden park. This day, very early in the morning, the first day of the summer holiday, it was beautiful outdoors, misty and foggy, yet a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was so early, before 6 o'clock, I knew there wouldn't be anyone on the trail to see me. I let the horse set off full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on the part that got steep on one side, leading down to the river. The thought of one step too close to the edge was too much even for a daring kid with next to non-existent risk assessment skills. Suddenly though, my horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I'd grown up with horses all my life and knew that usually indicated something needed to be investigated. Was there something wrong with his hooves? Did the horse spot something that spooked it? As I checked, his hooves seemed fine, but the horse still wouldn't move an inch. That's when I saw it though. Someone had set up a trap, a thin, sharp metal wire across the trail, just in perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and looked around. I couldn't see anyone. The wire was attached to 2 trees, impossible for me to remove. I led the horse around. To do so, I had to walk a bit up into the wooden area, onto the side of the trail. That's when I began to hear singing. Today, I only remember parts of it. Translated though, it would have been something like, "Hey all you runners, come here passing, let the life of blood pour out." I, as silently as I could and with my heart in my throat, backed away, climbed onto my horse, and hurried back the way I came as fast as I could. I knew I had to tell someone about this. At the same time, I wanted to avoid admitting to riding a huge and very forbidden horse on these protected trails. Now I had a problem. The old stories about a mad old man living in the shed in the woods, a shed that was once a cottage for the local hunter, came back to me as I hung on to the horse for dear life. I got home and immediately told my older brother what had happened. He went back there with me in tow. We found the wire trap, and after a while of searching, we also found a spear-like pole in the ground, right in the spot where you'd land if you came running and jumped over the fallen tree on the trail. We called the police right away. The area was searched thoroughly, and several similar traps were found. No sign of the old man, though. The following summer, there was big news in the local paper about spear-like poles being found just under the water's surface, directly under a little tower you were supposed to dive from at the lake. Black garbage bags filled with big rocks were found on the narrow bridge crossing the river. If a car had hit those, it might have gone off the road and into the water.